today's theme is all about working in research. So what you can do with your psychology degree that's more or less linked to some kind of applied research context. So a huge welcome to our brilliant panel. I'm delighted to have you here today, and we'll go around in a minute and you can introduce yourselves. Just before I do that, a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces. If you want to ask a question at any point, then please post it in the chat, or you can use this link which Leo has put into the chat, which is Slido. So I don't know how it works, guys. I'm very, very old, but apparently it's very easy. You click on it and I guess you write a question, and then I think you can all upvote the question if it's a popular one. Also to just say that by all means, you can have your cameras on, but we are going to be recording. In fact, we are recording the session. So if you're worried about, being on camera at a later point, then maybe turn your cameras off. Later on, there'll be an opportunity to talk to our alumni in breakout rooms, and there we'd really encourage you to put your mic on and your camera on. But for now, keep your mics off because of possible interference and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to start then by asking members of the panel to introduce themselves. So in no particular order, if we start off with Ella. Hi, Ella.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, and nice to go first. When I was first approached to do this, I was quite surprised because I've not gone into academic research. And when I was doing psychology, for me, research meant academia. And I thought, well, I guess I can do my BSc and then I can do a master's because I really enjoy this topic, but I'm probably not going to go for a PhD. So I've never thought of myself as a researcher, but I had a chat with the staff and with Leah. And my job has been research, actually, since I've left university. So I did my BSc at Manchester, and I did the course with international study, and I really, really enjoyed that. And it was actually at that year abroad, I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz. And to be honest, I went there because the campus was beautiful. I didn't go because I thought it was going to be amazing academically, but it was actually a really good university. And I did a lot of psychology research there. And that's how I realized that, okay, I actually really enjoyed this, and I don't find it as challenging as I thought I would. So I did quite a lot of research there, and came back to finish my fourth year at Manchester. And then I did my master's at the University of Kent. And at that point, I was focusing on social psychology. I was doing things to do with power and racism and intergroup contact, which felt very relevant to me for lots of reasons. And then after that, I was thinking I would try and stay in academia, but I wasn't really quite sure how. So I decided to start working for the family business. Now, the family business was a leadership and development company, and I would say just doing admin, but it was a very difficult job. And I was kind of like a glorified PA. I was like a personal assistant to the directors. And then gradually I would find out that actually quite a lot of psychology was going into these leadership programs that were all branded in a very beautiful and corporate way. There was a lot of psychology going on behind the scenes. So I used my job to learn a little bit more and learn some more about psychometrics and kind of decide how I feel about things like the Myers-Briggs that I maybe had certain opinions about during my course. And then as we were doing that, it was quite corporate work and it was all profit driven. And we all were feeling a little bit icky about the fact that we were doing this kind of work. So we decided to start a not-for-profit wing of the business. So the profit side was Another Way Associates. And then the not-for-profit side was Another Way Now. And Another Way Now, we would host these free events in Manchester in this quirky little venue called the Anthony Burgess Foundation. And we'd invite really interesting speakers. So we had like Rupert Sheldrake talk about consciousness and near-death experiences and mushrooms and all these really interesting things. And anyway, that became massively popular. And on Sunday, we did a huge one for hundreds of people, I think 500, 600 people. And we had Richard Branson, and then we had Sabrina Butler-Smith, who's just come off death row. And we had a Republican lawmaker who has become anti-death row. So lots of really interesting human rights stuff. And every day I still use my research skills for that, even though it's an events business. Sorry, I waffled a little bit, but that's
no, not at all. That is a really powerful insight into just your journey and how one thing led to something else. And I guess then a nice message is that you put yourself out there. You went to America, and you were just something happened out there that slowly changed the course of your life, and that's quite remarkable. So brilliant. I'm sure we'll come back to you very soon with more questions, but in the meantime, Elaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I have a very different route in psychology. Also did BSc in psychology, then completed my MSc in occupational psychology at Manchester Business School, and then went on to my first job working for the military, doing research for the military, where I started doing my chartership in occupational psychology. Now I work for myself in France, and I combine my background in psychology and research and investment to effectively just complete in-depth research projects which are predominantly qualitative in nature for investment management firms. So it's probably easiest to think about it as like investigative journalism. So completing interviews with subject matter experts, literature reviews, reviews of different sectors, just to kind of understand organizations, products, industries, and kind of do that softer side of investment. So moving away from just like qualitative profit and loss and thinking about like, what is the sector going to look like in 5 years' time? I work predominantly with US clients remotely, and I just get to learn every day, which is really great. And in terms of career steps, military, not-for-profits, investment, and then for myself, so lots of different areas and learning experiences, just to figure out what I was passionate about and what I wanted to do.
Would you say that after your degree, the research skills that you got from that, and then also the additional research skills you got in your master's, have been enough to allow you to do what you do today, or was there additional kind of training needed at times?
I think definitely additional training, like obviously doing your BSc and your master's, it's a really good kind of entry into research skills and learning the kind of building blocks of qualitative and quantitative research. But I think the experience that you get going out into the field and doing research projects in a variety of different areas, be it for the military or be it for ACAS or like for like trans rights or the education sector on like the Leadership Foundation for Higher Education, like really shows you that you can take those basic research skills and you can apply them in any sector, in any industry, because ultimately you're talking to people who are experts in that field, and your job is to just gather all of that information and to think about what does it mean and like what recommendations should we be making to make sure that employees have better working situations or context, or we need to improve the culture. Like you can really do anything with research. It's just applying those same skills like over and over again. So that's why I enjoy it so much.
Fantastic, thank you. Riddhi, over to you, please.
Hi, I'm Riddhi. I graduated from University of Manchester in 2017, so fairly recently, actually. And at the time, I really wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and I completed a few placements in different hospitals, just shadowing clinical psychologists, and I realized that it just wasn't for me. I was too sensitive for it. And meanwhile, I was falling in love with stats and research. I think Alison Fisher used to take the course at the time. I don't know who's taking it now. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And I decided to take on a master's in clinical neuropsychiatry because I was just so interested in the topic and it seemed really technical and really interesting. And I wanted to go into academic research. But as part of my master's, I was shadowing a neurosurgeon in my third semester. And that's when I came across PHE and NHS England and kind of like the policy research side of things. And I thought, that was really interesting. And I actually applied to the graduate management training scheme that the NHS has. And they have a few different specialisms. They have general management, they've got HR. I joined the health analysis specialism. And as part of the management training scheme, you go through 4 different placements. So you go through different organizations within the NHS, trusts, CCGs, NHS England as a whole. And you get a lot of experience in different kinds of research, different kind of analysis that's been going on in the organization. And I finally ended up here, and I'm working in the learning disability program now. So we work a lot with deaths data as well, which is a little bit depressing, but it is adding value, and that's what's important, isn't it? So we analyze different patients, and if they've passed away, sadly, we investigate into why that has happened. And every year there's a paper that comes out with recommendations that we have determined based on analyzing different deaths and looking at different case studies so that it doesn't happen in the future. There's also lots of work on collecting data and data management as well. So if you like to get technical and get your hands dirty, there's that as well. Every now and then we get thrown into random bits and pieces. Hello, COVID. So I've been working with the vaccination team as well. And recently there was quite a bit of research going on the Delta variant and its spread. I also supported a bit with Brexit and how it's going to affect our digital market in the UK. So I would describe my job as policy/operational research. So a lot less of writing papers, if that makes any sense. There are a few of them here and there, but most of it is just doing your research and then kind of just hand it over to policy colleagues who look at it and they're like, right, so these are the findings, what can we change? For example, I was recently working on the GP manifesto commitment. So most of you probably don't know, but the government promised that there will be 6,000 more GPs by the end of 2023. So there's a lot of work going on that. So I conducted some research to see how demographics have changed over the last 20 years. And we found out that, females tend to leave early. And so the policy colleagues looked into that and they were like, right, so females are leaving early. Let's introduce some new policies or incentives so that they stick around and we have more GPs, staying on. So that's the kind of stuff I work with.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. It'd be really interesting to see whether or not we get to that number of GPs as well. Maybe you can give us a prediction at some point. But yeah, it sounds like quite an ambitious target, I think. Okay, Simon, it's over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming along. My name is Simon Child. I'm my current job role is Head of Assessment Training at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. You've probably heard of Cambridge University Press, looking on the spines of some of your textbooks and various bits of reading over the last few years. My route in research is relatively traditional up until the kind of final part of my career so far. So I did an undergraduate degree at the University of Durham in psychology and a master's there as well in research methods. And then I took a studentship at the University of Manchester where I did my PhD. And I was a colleague of Doran's at the time, looking on the topic area.
Simon always kept me calm during periods of crisis when my research wasn't going particularly well, or you just needed that kind of friendly face and someone who's quite calm. So
which everyone needs at some point. It's quite a journey, that PhD. But once I finished the PhD after 3 and a bit years, I went eventually, after a short period at the University of Liverpool, I went to Cambridge, what was known as Cambridge Assessment at the time, to work as a research officer, so technically into industry. And I was in the qualifications reform and development team. So if any of you have heard of OCR, the exam board, you may remember when you were doing your A-levels and GCSEs that you may have seen OCR on your exam papers. I joined the organisation just at the point that Michael Gove was introducing his reforms at the government level. So we were doing a lot of research about how to deal with the kind of changes that he wanted to implement, and the research to try and support students in making the A-levels as valid as possible to help them in the transition to university in their first year. So when we were looking at psychology, it was things related to research skills, ironically enough, how we can give students enough research skills in their A-level to help support them into that transition into university. So that was the first kind of wave of research that I was doing when I joined the organization. Later on, I went into more operational side of things. So the work, the crunching of the data around the setting of grade boundaries, for example. So if you've done A-levels or GCSEs in the last few years, there's probably at one point where I was responsible for deciding the grade boundary. So if you got an A or a B, I'm partly responsible for that in some indirect way. So we did a lot of kind of just tracking predictive data around that. So in terms of the research skills required, I've ended up using almost all of them, but in very unusual ways. So the collection of qualitative and quantitative data, and similar to Riddy just before, the idea of translating that into so layman audiences can understand it and the recommendations can implement good policy in terms of changes to qualifications or to sort of broader policy points as well. So that's generally what I do day to day in my research role.
Brilliant. I think you're the guy to go to if you want next year's GCSE English exam for your brother or something like that ahead of time, guys. So yeah, brilliant. Alyssa, lovely to see you. Can you? Yes.
Hello. Sorry for being late. Zoom updates are not my friend. A real calamity getting in. Hello, everyone. I'm Elisa. I am a research manager for a company called Basis. We are an independent market research agency / consultancy based in London. I specialise in qualitative research, which means my projects are really around understanding the how and why of consumer behaviour and making recommendations to brands off the back of that. I work across a really broad range of sectors when it comes to kind of client mix. So one week I might be thinking about sustainable financial products. I'm in the depth of kind of exploring that at the moment. My mind is a bit boggled. And the next I might be thinking about makeup, so completely different, and what campaigns should look like. A lot of my work is global, which is fantastic. I've traveled to quite a few different markets as part of my research projects, which I always love. And what else to say? Yeah, that's probably quite enough about my role. In terms of how I got into research, I probably really fell into the role, which, speaking to another few people at my job, is actually the case for quite a few of us. I graduated with a degree in psychology from Manchester back in 2014, looked around at a few different roles kind of within marketing, within PR, and then started looking at research as well, and kind of just found myself falling into a role and just loving a lot about it. I did an advanced certificate in market and social research methods, which I found was quite helpful in kind of adding to my understanding of research design and everything. But I would definitely say that some of the skills that I learned on the research methods unit really still do come in handy in kind of setting me up for the role today. And I should add, I work 4 days a week in research, and I have a bit of a passion project in counselling. On the 5th day, do some volunteering for that, and that's kind of why I don't know if anyone's mentioned it already, but I'll be popping off the call early, but always around to answer any follow-up questions or anything from this.
Brilliant, thank you. Very comprehensive and interesting. And finally, Kavita. Hey.
Hey, sorry I was a bit late. So is it kind of my current role and how I got there?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Kavita. Technically my title is Assistant Psychologist Research Worker, which is just so long. And I'm employed by SLAM NHS Trust, but I'm affiliated with King's College University, IOPPN, and I'm working on a research trial. It's a multi-site randomised control trial across the UK, looking at trauma-focused cognitive behavioural therapy for people with psychosis. So we're hoping to recruit around 300 people. Like a bit of background, essentially, I think it's been like around 10 years in the making, because we know that a lot of people with psychosis experience high levels of complex trauma. Often people would not access trauma-focused support because people kind of fear that it's going to make their like positive symptoms worse, maybe their voices or kind of their distressing beliefs worse. So my role involves recruitment is a massive thing. So kind of disseminating research to NHS teams, stakeholders, participants, receiving informed consent. So I guess in a way, really selling the study, but in a very ethical way. So people are informed of the benefits, and kind of ensuring people are very research positive within teams, facilitating really in-depth assessments across different time points. Blinding is a real big part of the role as well. So there's kind of lots of thought behind how we ensure that I'm not unblinded, so I don't know whether people are allocated to therapy or not. Producing a lot of reports. There's kind of a lot about funding and deadlines. Are you doing what you're meant to be doing? Why aren't you reaching these deadlines? And when you're working with people, especially in this population, it is never straightforward or simple. Last two bits, I guess, working with like adverse events. So a lot of people in this population with psychosis will have a high rate of relapse, a lot of other things going on, social deprivation, especially in the South London area. And then like ultimately kind of working in an ethical way as well. A lot of admin as well, a lot of kind of spreadsheets. How I got there, and it's a mixed methods approach as well. So there is going to be like qualitative interviewing about whether the therapy is acceptable, and that will be delivered by lived experience individuals, and then quantitative too. I graduated last July from psychology.
They graduated, but it wasn't a proper graduation. We're going to get you a proper one this spring, I think. So you'll have your.
I'm a graduate then, a graduand.
Well, I think you are a graduate rather than a graduand, but technically we would like to give you a proper ceremony in spring because COVID took that away from you.
And you used to have so many great snacks at these events. I always used to go to every panel.
I know. I only volunteered for this employability role because the sandwiches were so good. Yeah, I know. Anyway, okay. So we've got some questions that have come in. And the first question, I think the most popular one at the moment is to sort of go around and see if anyone wants to answer this. But what work experience would you recommend for someone in first year? I'm going to ask you all to very briefly comment on that, just because I think it's a useful question. But I also want you to add in, if you can, what kind of student were you? I think it's really useful for the students who are watching to know, were you a straight first class, easy peasy student who loved stats and research methods, or were you very much a 2-1 student? Did you even enjoy the degree or not? So feel free to, like, as you answer that question, just give us a flavour of what you were like, and try and be fairly brief, just because I'm conscious of time. But perhaps if we work backwards, so Kavita, you've just graduated. So first of all, what kind of student do you think you were looking back?
I was really nerdy. I loved going to the library, but I also like partying a lot. So you can do both. And my spread of grades were like, I think my dissertation was completely kind of responsible for my overall mark. So kind of really working hard at that. Sometimes I did get like high 2s, and then sometimes I would get like medium first and then mid 2-1. So essentially a massive spread, but dissertation carries a lot of weight, and kind of not thinking that your grades for each assessment defines you, because I really took it all to heart, and it actually does work out fine. You're kind of consistent. And experience was the next
Yeah,
one.
that's great advice though, about how it doesn't define you, and one grade is one grade. And yeah, so work experience, what would you recommend?
I did really enjoy doing lots of different volunteering. So I did the placement year, and that was absolutely crucial for kind of getting my step in the door in research and clinical experience. So I'd recommend that, and not being afraid to kind of move away from home if you can. I did like Nightline, so there's lots of things which don't actually require like tons of hours if you kind of think what you want to get out of it. I did like once a week support group work, like my own. I did that placement module. So I did lots of different things, and making use of your summer can be good, but I was never someone who had something every single day of the week. And my biggest tip as well is that in the final year, I cut back on loads of work experience because your uni grades can't change, and that's actually the main evidence you've got that you can, do what you want to do. So don't be afraid to cut back in final year as well.
Bill, thank you. Elisa.
Oh yeah, is that me?
Sorry, is that how I say it? Say it again.
Elisa, no worries.
Elisa. Okay, I'll get there.
No worries. So in terms of work experience, I actually think someone else touched on this, in that sometimes as a researcher, you're a bit like an investigative journalist, which I think is a really lovely analogy for being a qualitative researcher. So actually one of the internships that I did was for a news outlet, and that was really kind of feeding those skills of being really curious, which I think plays into a lot of my kind of everyday role now. And I did actually do a little bit of writing when I was at uni for, I can't remember what it's called now. Is it the Mancunian? Is it still called that, the student newspaper?
We've got two, I think, the Mancunian and the Tab. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah,
and I remember them saying that kind of was something that stood out on my CV, actually, kind of stood me in good stead. I didn't do any specific internships in research, but I know that they do exist out there. And it's always good to kind of just reach out to agencies almost speculatively, even if they don't say that they're doing internships, and kind of try and get your foot in that way. And in terms of what I was like as a student, I would say I struggled with stats. I won't lie, I remember finding it quite hard. But at the same time, I was also a bit of a nerd, and I did really kind of focus on my grades, particularly in the last year. Although, yeah, still squeezed in quite a lot of partying, because you've got to do that at Manchester, right?
Absolutely. Simon, over to you.
Yes. So in terms of what kind of student I was, I would say probably quite poor initially, and then gradually improving with my own sort of maturity over the 3 years of the undergraduate and the master's and the PhD. I remember in my first year, I don't know how I managed to do it. I got 21% in a multiple choice test, which had only 4 options. So if I guessed them all, I would have got 25%. So it was negatively marked. So that just shows that occasionally I wasn't concentrating perhaps as much as I should. But I managed to get a 2-1 in the end. And I think one of the indicators or symptoms that I was maturing as a student was that I was looking for or thinking ahead about this idea of potentially going into a research career. So in my second year, there wasn't anything formalized in terms of placement years or anything at Durham where I was, but I volunteered for some eye tracking based studies, both as a participant, but also doing a little bit of the coding and volunteering to do some of the coding for free with some of the PhD students. So that was quite good in terms of building that relationship with understanding what PhD students did as part of their day-to-day work, understanding even things like what the stipend, how far that goes as a student, does it cover all your costs and bills, and sort of understanding the reality of being a PhD student. I picked up on the way as well during that relatively short experience, just during holidays and that sort of thing, working towards that. So yeah, that's generally what I was looking to do day to day to sort of build up that, because when it got to the interviews for the PhD, for the studentships, the people that were looking to employ you, if you like, and take you on to the PhD were asking what's different about you compared to anybody else that has great grades and so on. So to show that curiosity and that ambition and that motivation through the volunteer work in a research context, I think helped me get through the door and onto the PhD.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Riddy.
So I would say I was quite I wouldn't say I was quite nerdy. I was kind of quite all over the place, really. Did manage to graduate with a 2-1 at the end. But yeah, I think I agree with Vita that everything kind of just, all your grades kind of vary. There were there were times when I got a high 2-2 and times when I got a first. But I was involved in quite a few extracurricular activities. So I was involved in the Psychology peer mentoring scheme with Doran, actually, which I think was quite helpful. I was also involved
brilliant in that role, that has to be said. I mean, I think you were a true natural, and you really were able to work with people and, you know, help the transition for first year students. And I think you did a brilliant job.
I think it just kind of, I was just passionate about it, really. But that really helped me because I got quite a few transferable skills that I apply in my daily job every single day, you know, communicating with people, you know, planning events, writing emails. Trust me, it's really important. You may not realize it, but the majority of your job is writing emails, really. I was also a part of the Manchester Model United Nations. So lots of debating, lots of, you know, world politics and that sort of stuff. What else was I involved in? I think I was involved in music for a bit as well. So kind of all over the place, like I said, but I think what helped me the most was each of these different experiences. I got quite a few transferable skills. So to get into my job, I had to go through an assessment center and interviews, of course, but assessment center is the hardest bit because it kind of tests who you are as a person and what your skills are, and you really have to demonstrate it. There's absolutely no way you can plan for it or, you know, practice it. You just kind of have to perform. And if you're in that situation and you kind of don't know how to handle yourself, you don't know how to write an email, you don't know how to communicate with people, you will not pass. So I think that is really important. And all the experience that you have doesn't necessarily have to be directed towards the career that you're planning on going into, but just make sure that you get loads of transferable skills, really. I think that is what helped me the most, even without realizing it at the time. I was just doing all of these because I was having fun. But I think looking back, all of these really, really helped me. And it also looks really good when you write your personal statement to get into your master's, or, you know, to get into a job, or when you speak in an interview. I think all of these experiences, when you give examples of this, it really shows the recruiter, the employer, that you have these skills and you have these leadership skills, you have these communication skills, because you have to realize all the technical stuff you can actually learn on the job. It's these things that, you know, you kind of have to learn with experience, and if you don't already have it and somebody else does, then they're probably going to get the job and you won't. So I think that would be my recommendation first year, is just to build on that, find things that you enjoy, really.
Brilliant. Okay, so it sounds like you're all saying the same thing. Find something maybe that you enjoy, put yourself out there, do some volunteering, take it, you know, get something that's going to make you distinctive, write for a newspaper, write for the Manc Union, you know, just do something that's going to make you stand out. Elaine, is there anything you wanted to maybe add, or also tell us a little bit about your own student experience?
I'm probably going to say something that I shouldn't, but when I was, I think probably the person who graduated earliest in this cohort group, but there was, when I was at uni, a lot of people were pushing, you know, volunteering, and I actually decided that I would get a job instead. I wanted to be self-sufficient. I wanted to support myself financially. So between the job and doing a lot of sports, I'm sure a lot of you do sports at the university, and studying and drinking, between those four things, there wasn't really a lot of time for volunteering. But what I would say is being employed and having a job, be that the student union was very good. I worked there for quite a few years. I worked in bars in Manchester for a number of years. Learning those skills, timekeeping, finances, interpersonal relationships, communication, being able to be managed by someone who's potentially not your favorite human being in the world, and managing conflict, like having all of those skills and being able to go to your first interview in the same way that Riddy said, and being able to give examples and tell someone, you know, like, how did you manage this really challenging situation, like really is very, very helpful and useful, and will kind of set you apart from other candidates. So I would just say, if you don't have time to volunteer because you need to think about supporting yourself financially, like having that work and having those employability skills is also extremely, extremely helpful. So don't feel like it's the end of the world if you have to choose one over the other, or, being a training officer in a sports club, or like all of these things are like just thinking about how those skills will help you in your first job and how to apply them.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and I think that does resonate with the messages that we give our students, which is really just do something. It can be a job, absolutely, but if you don't want to commit to a job, then volunteering, or maybe there's a particular social justice kind of angle that you want to pursue. But either way, it's the same basic message, which is that you just need that extra sparkle really on your CV, on your resume. And last but not least, Ella.
So Elaine, thanks for saying that. I think that's a really, really important point to make. I also worked quite a lot through uni, and I think I always wanted to do psychology when I was doing my A-levels, and that was all I wanted to do. So when I finally got into, my perfect chosen uni and did my perfect chosen course, I actually started off and my grades were below average, and I had this quite quiet, panicky crisis of confidence. And I just thought, oh my God, I put all of my eggs in this basket, and now what if I'm rubbish at it? What if everyone in the room is doing more than me and better than me, and they're more impressive, and they're working for the NHS, and they're doing all these like amazing things? So I think don't panic if your grades aren't what you want them to be. The thing that changed for me, so I started off below average, and then I ended up with like the best grades you can get in a master's, and I just nailed everything. The more I studied, the better I got at it. And the trick that I learned was to hack my enthusiasm. I found out the topics that made me stay up late at night and read and watch stupid documentaries on Netflix and chat with my friends at your pre-drinks, when you end up chatting in the corner about the latest thing that a certain politician said. Find out what it is that gets you really, really interested, because I'm telling you, psychology is involved, whether it is, racism or music or the psychology of time or aging, whatever it is. If you find out what you're enthusiastic about, hack it, make it exciting for you for your degree. And if you can find a placement that works, great. And if you can't, and you want to, maybe get a job or whatever, do that. Don't panic. Just stay happy. Don't drive yourselves into the ground trying to get the perfect grades, because in the long term, we all had all these different journeys. We've all ended up with lives that we're pretty happy with. So you'll be fine. That's what I'm saying.
Again, brilliant advice. And I absolutely say the same. Colleagues and I, when we're talking, we say the same things. Not every aspect of my job do I absolutely love. There's so much about it that I love, particularly the teaching and the student facing roles. And that's enough. Some of the admin can be a bit oppressive at times. But you find the thrill, you find the thing in the discipline or in the work and the job that you like, and you run with it, and you make that your main thing. So brilliant advice there, Ella. Thank you so much. People have upvoted another question, which is quite similar. So I'll read it out, but I'm not sure that we'll need to explore it. So how was your experience? Okay, no, that's changed now. Sorry. What was your academic route? Okay, what was your academic route? What sort of further study and experience did you gain after your BSc to get your job? Is there anybody that wants to just answer that one, or that feels that they haven't answered it already?
I can take on that. So I did my master's in clinical neuropsychiatry, but I actually forgot to mention this. As part of the graduate management training scheme, I completed 2 more masters. Well, not master.
Oh, I think we're
paid for by my membership, because the scheme is designed in a management region, and the other one is in health data analytics. So those are the 2 degrees that I have that I probably use the most. Sorry,
Rudy, we had some technical problems, so you might want to log out and log back in, or maybe we'll come back to you in a minute. But I think we heard the end of you were saying you've got basically, like, how many degrees do you have, Rudy?
So I've completed my BSc. After that, I did my master's in clinical neuropsychiatry. But as part of my job, as part of the graduate management training scheme, I also completed a postgraduate certificate in healthcare leadership, again, from the University of Manchester and the University of Birmingham. I think they kind of deliver it jointly. And another postgraduate diploma in health data analytics from UCL. And that was all part of my job, part of my contract, paid for by my employer. But that is probably something I use a lot in my research job every day, because it's mainly technical skills really, and management side of health, which is slightly different to your normal business management, I think. But yeah, that's the academic side of my job.
Riddy, where your master's in clinical neuropsychiatry, was that at King's or?
Yes, I was at King's College.
Yeah, I remember. Brilliant. I think I might
you wrote my
reference.
recommendation.
Did I write a reference for you? Right.
Yeah.
I remember. Okay. I knew it was somewhere like that. Perfect. Okay. So I'm gonna move on to the next question. So how long did it take you guys then from graduation to find the job that you're in now? And sort of how many sort of in between jobs did you end up as a stepping stone? I'm just going to pick who's on my screen now. So Simon, can you answer that one for us?
Yeah. So so once I'd finished the traditional route, if you like, BSc, Masters, and PhD, I had a very short period of time, 7 months at the University of Liverpool, where I was essentially as a research associate on a very short-term contract. And that was when I still had ambitions at the time for going into a sort of standard academic career, becoming a research associate, lecturer, senior lecturer, and going through that traditional route. By the end of that 6 months, I realized that it would be quite difficult to keep going for these short-term contracts. And I thought that it would be better to go into industry at that point. And that's when I started looking at research opportunities that were permanent positions. So around in that 7-month period, I started looking for work at in industry, and that's when I got to Cambridge Assessment and into the research team there, and I've been there ever since. So, and just moving around different jobs within that particular organisation. So, in answer to the question, one really bridging job between graduation and where I am now.
Real. If I ask Elaine the same question, because you're obviously kind of freelance, I guess you're living in France. It's probably quite a different journey, I imagine.
I was giggling when you asked the question because I remember being the bane of my mother's life. I did about 2-year stints in each role that I went to, and I thought, okay, right, that was interesting. I've learned a lot of skills there, but actually I want to go do something different. So what I would say to you guys is I always felt this pressure that I needed to know exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. When I was doing my psychology BSc, and I kind of fell into my occupational psychology masters. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I've done roles probably and moved every 2 years and thought, oh, what do I like about this job and what can't I put up with? And then I'd look for another role that had all of the elements that I really enjoyed. And I could keep on repeating that process until eventually I thought, well, I really like psychology. I really love research and I really enjoy investment. How do I create a role for myself that combines all of those three things together? And I'm super passionate about that. So now I get paid to do that for a living, which is wonderful. And you make loads of like different you meet lots of different clients along the way because you work for lots of different people and they remember you and then they employ you in the future. So all I would say is as long as you do your job well and you're passionate about it and you keep those connections, like don't feel like you have to get pigeonholed into a certain industry. I've worked in lots of them and really just took the time to think about what makes me happy. So just do what makes you happy. Like don't get stuck in a job that you don't enjoy. Like you can do whatever you want to do with research. So yeah, I've taken 7 years to get to where I am now and probably done like 5 different jobs. So
do you think you're at your final destination, or do you think that you'll look back in 2 years' time and think, actually I'm changing slightly, sorry mum, but I'm changing slightly?
I would say that the current clients that I'm working for are trying to take me back to the dark side and take me in-house, but I'm trying desperately not to allow that to happen again. Like I say, if you do a good job for someone, they usually decide that they'd like you for themselves. And I don't mean that in an obnoxious way, just in a sort of like, if you love what you do and you deliver good work, people will always employ you. So I think they would like me to come over to the US and work for them exclusively, but I'm trying to stay in France.
Is that just a lifestyle choice?
Yeah, you've got to have your work-life balance as well. Like, you've got to love what you do, but also take time for yourself to, say, go into the mountains or climb or run, or, you know, whatever makes you happy, wherever your happy place is.
Elisa, I know you need to go quite soon, so I'm going to give you a comment there as well. So again, you've got an extraordinary career, really, which seems to have two sides to it. You've got your counselling work, you've got your sort of PR consultancy work. How long did it take to sort of find all of that stuff post-graduation?
Sure. So I'd say as well, I'm still in the space of figuring out, you know, what it is that I love about research, and kind of cramming myself into projects that meet that space as well, kind of always volunteering at my agency for, I love the sound of this project, or I love the sound of that project. So it's still a space of kind of experimenting. So when I graduated, I kind of let off steam, went backpacking for a bit, didn't even think about work after saving up for it, and then came back and applied for a job that first year, worked for one agency for 2 years, decided I loved qual research, but I wanted to do more international work. I wanted to work with a broader range of clients, and that's what made me apply for the second agency that I still work at now. And then I guess, over the last few years, I started thinking I still want to do more kind of something more in the space of kind of a helping profession, which is how I got into kind of looking into counselling. And that's how I kind of ended up hybrid working. And it's still a kind of constant negotiation of how you make that work, which sometimes can be a bit challenging, but it's also amazing. And I love doing two things. For me, that really kind of tickles different parts of my brain. So works for me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so if we look at our next question, what do students want to know? So I think Iris has a really good question here, and I don't know if Amanda's around, because it might be helpful to get her. Oh, she's back. Hi, Amanda. So a question that we get asked a lot, really, and this is a great time to ask it, and I think maybe Kavita can also maybe comment on this, but how do students go about, how should they go about finding, in particular, research opportunities as undergraduates? And Iris is asking, should we email profs to see if they need any help? If so, how can we know what project or research they're currently working on?
Yeah, no problem. So there's a couple of ways of approaching this. So we do encourage students to approach academic advisors, lecturers, or any academic that they know in an area that they're interested in. And usually in your own institution, so at the University of Manchester, but it doesn't have to be, but you're more likely to get responses to see if you can support anybody's research. The likelihood is that you're not necessarily going to be supporting an academic's research, but you might be supporting, as an undergraduate, a PhD student. You might be doing some supportive work for them. And we've seen a number of students do that. The other thing that is in place at the University of Manchester is the student experience internships. So every year, the university has a pot of money, and it pays for students to have a paid 8-week experience in their summer, usually for the second year. So it's mainly for second years out there, but sometimes it's available for first years as well. And some of those are research focused. So in January, February time each year, we write to lots of academic colleagues and say, have you got a research project you'd like some support with? They come up with the projects, we put the money alongside, and then we recruit. So just to say, do your own proactive reaching out. But in February, make sure that you're watching the Career Service job board, Career Connect, following the emails that we send out to you, because we'll start advertising those opportunities as well. And we've seen lots of really interesting projects being done. I don't know if you've hired any in the past, Doran, but I think there's been a number of really interesting projects being done there. Yeah, no,
I have. And Kavita, I just wonder, because you've obviously gone into a research post very quickly, and you did the year placement as well. And I think students probably want to hear a little bit about your year placement if that's okay.
So in terms of research experience, you can get a lot from your modules, and you can actually really sell yourself with the things that are mandatory, like really specifying your grades, what you liked about certain reports. And then when I looked at my placement year, I was always more interested in clinical, and it just happened to be that this service also is a research centre. So I supported a randomised controlled trial there. So you'd be surprised at how you can kind of just see opportunities without planning them, and kind of how much you can talk about things, and not, you kind of might undersell what you're doing, but even transcribing a recording of an assessment someone else has done, you can really expand on that and learn so much. And being realistic that you won't be the person doing the assessment, which for so many reasons you'll appreciate later on. But, you know, even if you're just entering data or adding up scores, to put that on your CV years later has a lot of value. And then, yeah, I know people who would kind of reach out to their supervisors or any master students, even if it's like a couple of hours a month or as a one-off. You know, they don't necessarily ask how much you've done. So I've put on applications, I've done blah, 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 but little do they know it's like 4 hours. But I still got a lot from those 4 hours. And so that was really important. And then I've kind of kept links with those people I worked with. So years later, they're having calls with me, giving me tips for interviews. They're sharing their lecture notes as they've gone on to do the doctorate, which has just been like beyond invaluable. So kind of forming good relationships and showing an interest, you get opportunities that other people might not. Even if you're in a service that isn't directly research linked, just having a look at their shared drive, looking at their reports, kind of consort diagrams, how can you learn how to do those things? How can you be involved, even if it is a little bit, but kind of in indirect ways, you can get a lot. And now I'm in a research role because of my experience working with that specific population. So prior to that, I was in a purely clinical role, which was really awful, to be honest. So you probably will do jobs that won't kind of make you happy, but that drove me to look for new roles. And even though my role was clinical, I would still attend like the odd training session hosted by the NHS Trust, stuff like how to be more research positive, so I could still tailor my interests where I had the time. And now I talk a lot about my dissertation as well, so don't kind of underplay what you're doing at uni.
Thank you so much. I think one of the really interesting things about the panel, and I might come on to Ella for this one as well, is that we talk about research, you know, as though it's one thing, and it's so clear looking at you that it's anything that you want to investigate the reality of, or something like that. It's, you know, and so I think sometimes if you're a student, especially if you're in years 2 or 3 and maybe you've done some lab reports but they're a bit dry and you don't really, and it's making you think, God, I'm not a really good researcher. A lot of that is about a very specific type of research where there's a lot of conventions and rules and APA guidance and conventions and stuff like that. Whereas it seems that what a lot of people here, I think probably most of the panel are saying, is that actually the beauty is that you find something that you're genuinely really interested in, and then the research becomes a kind of pleasure because it's about finding out more or packaging that in some way. Ella, do you have anything to say about that? Because I think you're someone who's probably using research skills in a very sort of non-conventional way.
Yeah, definitely a non-conventional way. So, I mean, we do these events about human rights issues, and that's really tricky. So I used to think that it's easy to know what the human rights are and what is right. And obviously research in psychology teaches you that's not the case. So I knew that in psychology world, but in my job, you know, for example, we've done quite a few events around feminism. And recently we did one about trans rights. And that is a really difficult topic to deal with because lots of people have lots of opinions about lots of different things. And you know, my directors come to me and they say, okay, well, you're the one with the history of research. So tell us what's the right perspective here. So to be able to research human rights and understand, you know, taking the emotional element out of something and researching something objectively and being able to present it to your higher ups and to people who have very different views from you and people who, you know, say some things that might make you upset, you know, especially talking about things like human rights. is a really important skill. And there's not a single person in my whole team who has that skill. And they're the person they come to for that. So yeah, there's definitely ways to apply research.
Exactly. Ella, when you've got your research sort of completed, what do you do with it? I mean, is this stuff that ends up published? Does it go to a think tank? It
really varies. Yeah, it really varies. So it's rarely published. It normally stays in-house, and then it culminates in the events that we do. And those events are kind of one-time events, and we've been asked to do it by an organization of some kind, or a charity might approach us and ask us to host an event for them, but I will have to do the research. So it's rarely physically published, but I'm responsible for publishing online in terms of the social media aspect, all the stats and figures and things, and publishing it in that way, but not academically publishing it. It ends up in the real world and it has our business name on it, so it has to be correct. And it has my name on it, so it has to be correct.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, I guess. Just that fear that something might go out there that's not quite right. But I'm sure that you do it beautifully. I'm just going to see if there's anything I can ask that's a quick win, because I know we're running out of time. Amanda, how much volunteering would you recommend first year students do?
I think I would say do what you feel comfortable with, but I think do a little bit more than that. I think a lot of people kind of play things safe or choose things that are kind of in their comfort zone. So I'd say try something that you think you can't do or that it's not possible to do. But in terms of the quantity, so try a couple of things. I mean, it's got to be what fits with you, your commitments. If you, as was mentioned before, if you need to work, if you've got a part-time job, I think just make something work for you. But I've seen a lot of students who find that sometimes when you do put in some volunteering, it can be a real re-energizer. And if you spend all your time just studying, sometimes that can be kind of quite draining, and it can bring a context to some of the things that you're learning. So I'd say challenge yourself, but do what feels right for you as well. But there's so many opportunities that are available that you can easily sort out. So if anybody is around in the next day, the volunteer fair was happening today and tomorrow at Whitworth Hall. And I went along today, I was on one of the stands, and some of the opportunities were brilliant, like Manchester Mental Health, the Big Life group were there, and they were all looking for people to get involved. And I think tomorrow Health Watch are there, and I think that's health research. So if you are interested in getting some research experience, pop along and see Health Watch, because they might be worth a chat as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to squeeze in one more. There's a couple of questions here. I think it's probably for me and Simon, but they're about PhDs, the process of applying and the challenges of doing one. Oh, have you just answered that, Simon? Is that what I've just seen pop?
The written question I have, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to comment on the application process for your PhD?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there was we haven't got very long, but I think there was two different main routes. So I took what was called the studentship route, which was essentially when the supervisors for the PhD almost come up with an idea, a big idea for what they want the student to do for a PhD, and then they invite potential students to apply for that on the basis of the overall abstract, if you like, for what the PhD was. That was my route in. And from there, it ended up being a more sort of interview-based process. So checking my suitability for that PhD, and then also comparing my skill set and the abstract with other students and other submissions for other studentships. So that was generally the route that I took. There's, of course, the funding route, where you would go to a potential supervisor and build an application with an external funding body. So that's a different route. I'm not sure if that's the route you took, Doran.
No, I did a studentship as well.
Did you? Right, okay.
Very similar. So you've answered the question for me. Right, so that's great. I guess there's loads of questions that we've not got through as always, but we'll send the panel some questions and we'll get back to you. But you can also ask the panel a question in the next half an hour. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And if you've got any questions for anyone, feel free to go to the breakout room in which they're in. And first of all, I'm just getting a message from Leah. So, okay, do they do the survey now, Leah? Is that the procedure?
Yeah, so the breakout rooms will open in a minute. So if I can just ask the students that's still here, there's a little survey. So if you would love it if you could just share us your opinion about this session, and it will help us plan future sessions as to whether we do them online, face-to-face, and what kind of themes we do. So if you click on that survey, we'd really like to hear from you. And I'm also going to open breakout rooms. The link to the survey is in the chat, so as long as you're on the session, you'll be able to access it. So if you want to join the breakout rooms, you can do that and then complete the survey afterwards. And yeah, so as Doran's just said, I just want to say a massive thank you to the alumni before we do put you in breakout rooms for joining us today. And then yes, there's so many questions that haven't been answered, so we'll send those questions to the alumni and try and get some written responses if any of the alumni are happy to kind of send those on to us, and we'll share them with the students. But if you want answers to your questions now, then do make the most of these breakout rooms. If we can ask the students to try and use their camera and order if you've got access to it to ask the questions, or if you don't have access to those, or if you're in a library space, do join the breakout room and you can use the chat, which will just be private within your breakout room.